welcome to React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabit. Today on our show, we have a special guest, Catalin Miron, calling in from Prague. Welcome to the show, Catalin.
Hey. Nice to see you guys, and yeah, really a pleasure to be near you here.
Infinite Red is a US-based consultancy specializing in React and React Native. They do mobile app and web design and development. They are deeply involved in the React and React Native open source communities, publish the React Native newsletter with 10,000 subscribers, and are involved with the React Native core development. If you have a project and need design or engineering help from an experienced team to take it all the way from concept to completion, get in touch with Infinite Red. Also check out Chain React, the React Native conference, which is hosted by Infinite Red in July in Portland with 500 developers from all around the world. You can find them at infinite.red. Make sure to mention you heard about them in this ad. So me and Catalin met last week actually at App.js Conf. We've known each other on social media, I guess, or I've known him and we've interacted. But the first time we really met was at App.js Conf. So we're fresh off of that conference. That was a React Native and Expo conference in Krakow held by Software Mansion. We had a lot of fun there, so we'll probably talk a little bit about that. But the topic of the show today is going to be around animations and UI gesture challenges with React Native, and we might all touch on a little bit of web. So Catalin's here to kind of talk about that. He has a lot of experience there and can offer us some insight. So before we get into the topic, can you give us a quick introduction about yourself and what you're doing these days with React Native?
Yeah, sure, man. So my name is Catalin Miron, as Nadir said. I've been doing React for a long time, almost 5 years now. And I also had access to React Native even before it was versioned. So I'm really stuck because back then I started learning Swift in order to do a native side. But one of my colleagues had React Native access to React Native repository, and so he gave me the rights. And since then, because I already had some React knowledge, jumping to React Native was super easy for me. Only the render differs, like, you have view and text on React Native, but on the web you have PE and divs. And nowadays, previously I was working for Hootsuite, which is a Canadian, Vancouver-based social media company, and I was working from Bucharest office. And for 1 year now, I moved to Skype, where I'm in the messaging team and build cross-platform Skype using React and React Native stack.
So you work for the Skype team. Does that mean you work under Microsoft, or are you kind of a consultant for a contractor or something, or do you work for Microsoft?
Yeah, so right now I'm a full-time employee working for Skype, which is under Microsoft. So I gain both benefits from Microsoft and Skype because they offer two different packages. But since Skype it's under Microsoft, I benefit from both of them. And yeah, in the messaging team, we are composed from out of 10 teams, let's say, on the UI side. But nowadays, we shrink the number of teams and we try to do cross UI stuff, more or less.
Okay, cool. And it's cool because we're actually recording this using Skype. So,
yeah, so, I know at least the emote icons.
Yeah. I mean, I hear about React Native with Skype, and I know that React XP was kind of something that Microsoft created a while back. That was basically another abstraction on top of React Native that allows you to have primitives to ship applications to Windows and web as well. Are you all using React XP, or is it pure React Native?
Yeah, it's quite funny though, because React XP started because of Skype. So when a bunch of developers started to re-implement Skype using the new design, they actually started with React and React Native in mind. And React XP was the unification of those platforms, so React plus React Native, and everything is built on top of React XP because this offers you the possibility to bundle platform specific. So nowadays, I think that we're using almost the same version as React XP open sourced. And I think that we don't have dedicated React XP version in-house. So everything is from GitHub.
Interesting, very interesting. So I'm assuming that a lot of the team that is using React XP is also contributing back to it there at Skype, or like if you need a feature, since you all are kind of the owners of the repo, or not you, but your company, is it pretty easy to kind of get updates in for features that you need and bug fixes?
Yeah, usually we have a dedicated time. So as long as you need to fix a bug or you need to add a feature on top of an existing one, on top of an existing feature, you want to enhance it, definitely you can get time to contribute to the open source version as well. So of course we have like a proxy in between the open source version and our Skype application, where we parse the whole open source project saying that, hey, this is GDPR compliant, like internal stuff that Microsoft is required to do. And we somehow have to upgrade both versions. But yeah, definitely we have at least 10% of our time for open source contributions, like React XP, for example. It's one of our main package that we can contribute to, but we also have Resub or Syntask or Temporarist client. Those are like packages that we are using also internally in Skype. So whenever someone will raise a bug, and it's a critical one from our perspective, we definitely have the time to go in and fix it right away.
So the topic today is going to be, again, animations and UI challenges with React Native. What are some of the general issues that people have getting up and running, with animations in React Native that you see? And then we'll go into how some of those problems are mitigated and some tools and best practices around that.
Yeah, sure. As you said, we met for the first time in person at the App.js conference in Krakow. I gave there a talk about one of the problems that usually developers have when they are trying to mimic something React Native old, and that's a gradient animation. Usually people are scared of animating gradients just because the syntax for gradients in React Native is quite different for the one on the web. But on the same time, it's really hard to animate because it's based on colors. So you had to interpolate two different colors in parallel in order to display a gradient animation. And for example, also I saw a shared element transition being super, super hard. And you can achieve it, but definitely you'll drop some frames during the animation. And for example, you also have like interactions like gestures plus animation in general, as you'll have a gesture, an item on the list, and you'd like to have different actions on the right and different actions on the left, as you'll have for Gmail or maybe Outlook email application, where you can swipe faster and you'll get like whatever the direction is, you'll get the action right away if you swipe faster based on the velocity and so on. So I think that those micro interactions are pretty hard, but those are again achievable. And I think that those are like the pain points, let's say in React Native world, when you're trying to get your app in the App Store, because it's like a must-have in the mobile world, those micro interactions and small UI animations.
So what are some of the libraries that people are using? I know that you can do things with the core animated library, and now there's reanimated. And I'm kind of curious, would you use a library like that to do animations on the gradients, or is there something else that you would use? And then my last question, and these are a lot of questions, so if you need me to get back to them, let me know. But what are people using, or what do you use these days to even implement a gradient that is cross-platform in React Native? I know a long time ago you had to use a third-party external library. Is that still the case, or is there something native that you can do to implement gradients?
Okay, so to answer the first question, usually I'm using animated API, but more specific to animate gradients, in my examples, I'm using PopMotion library, which is a super simple but yet powerful library for building animations in general. So it's platform agnostic. And this is super smart because it offers you interpolations of linear gradients out of the box. So you don't need to map a color to another. You can specify the from linear gradient and the to linear gradient based on a duration, and it's going to interpolate right out of the box. And usually with the output, I'm setting state and pass it down to the gradient component. This is how I've done the gradient animation, but definitely I will be using reanimated in order to gain that 60 FPS, because reanimated is moved to the UI thread, and so the JS thread is unblocked, and you can do a bunch of other stuff like fetching or a JS logic without caring about the dropping frames of the animation. And could you please repeat the second question, because I tend to forget things.
Yeah, so I'd asked about, the actual like libraries that people are using and what you're using. But I was asking like, how would you implement a gradient animation? Like, would you use like which library, I guess, first of all, would you use to even implement a gradient in the first place? And then like what combination would you use for the gradient and the animation? Would it be something like animated plus X library?
Yeah, I think the best way to go is using React Native Reanimated by Christoph, because it gives you 60 FPS for sure. You're not blocking the JS thread. But as an alternative to that, you can use PopMotion, for example, or either animated library that comes in React Native. But using animated from React Native, you need to ensure that you had to create a proxy in between the view and the linear gradient in order to interpolate the colors and pass them as prop to the linear gradient. Yeah, my way to go is how I've implemented it. It's PopMotion plus like math underneath linear gradient to always calculate the properties to be sent to linear gradient. And by the way, that calculation, it's open source, and I built a library called React Native CSS Gradient that supports directly the CSS syntax for gradients, and you can pass it right away. And he's hiding the complexity and the math behind the scene, and is going to output directly the linear gradient that you desire to. And it's working with multiple gradients. And if you're coming from a web background, you know that you can specify, for example, multiple gradients separated by comma. And this is also working using this library that I've built.
So what are some of the challenges that people are running into implementing, animations in general on React Native, not specific to gradients? I know that there's a lot of discussion around performance. And when animated first came out, you weren't able to use the native thread, if I understand correctly. And then they had use native driver, which added, an API to access the native thread a while back. And then now we have reanimated. Even with these libraries, are people still running into issues? I know Android seems to be usually where the issues come up, older versions of Android. But what are some of the general issues that people are seeing?
So, for example, React Native also exposed layout animation. And usually it's dropping quite a lot of frames on Android side. So, for example, if you're setting state from 1 to 2, let's say you have a key and you want to animate that change. On Android, it's going to drop a lot of frames just because you cannot afford to animate that change from a layout point of view. But on app.js, still, Christoph announced the layout transition, so from exposed in reanimated. And so that also moved everything to the native layer, and you can easily interpolate between two different states. Instead of using layout animation, you can use a more declarative way of transitioning between an old and a new state. That's one thing. And the other one is, for example, I implemented the Wheel of Fortune in React Native, and I'm building the wheel using D3 plus SVG. And based on the velocity of your gesture, I'm animating that. And I see that even though I'm using animated, I still see dropping frames. And that's because we don't have the capability of exposing a native API saying, this is the view, and this is where you'll go to just animate it using this speed. And so we always have to calculate something on the JS layer, and this turns into dropping frames.
So I guess I have a question around iOS versus Android animations, because I haven't really done a lot of animations that are too crazy lately. How has Android and iOS differ these days? So if you write some complex animation, Can you kind of expect it to work across platform at this point using one of, some of these newer techniques, or are there still issues on Android?
So for example, I haven't encountered too many problems on this cross-platform animation work that I've done since now. And for example, in Skype, we don't have that problem. Either way, we're building for iOS and Android. Using native driver, we have the confidence that we're not going to drop any frames. But yeah, it really depends when you're actually triggering the animation. If you're, for example, in the middle of a fetch request and you're populating the view, the UI with something, and you'd like to animate on the same time, you might run into different problems. And so that's why you have like the interaction manager, which gives you the capability of triggering an animation after you've done some fetch requests, or the UI is not going to be re-rendered, or you're not doing any UI work. So in case you're going to drop any frames and your JS thread is full, be aware that there is an interaction manager out there in React Native exposed, so you can run after interactions the animation itself.
So you mentioned that you're doing some of this work at Skype. What kind of animations have you all been implementing, I guess, in the application? I haven't really used mobile Skype, so I don't really know, but I'm kind of curious, what are some of the things that you all are using animations on?
So I think we forked the experimental navigation, for example, and we've added decoration types on top of that. And we're still using it internally, even though React Native it's around for more than 1 year now. I think that we're still trying to migrate to React navigation. I think it's a dream, but either way, because of the code base is super huge, it's really hard for us to move to a different library for navigation. But experimental navigation, for example, we're using it for navigation, and you can pass different transitions like a fade in, slide out, zoom in, zoom out, for example. And this is using animated API like the one exposed from React Native, but we ensure that we're running on the native driver. So we're not going to animate the width and height or so only translation in scales and opacity.
Yes, and I've noticed that definitely makes a huge difference. If you can try to focus all your animations around the native driver and then kind of stay within the realm of what's possible there, you can get a lot of performance benefits just by doing that without having to worry about a lot of other stuff, right?
Yeah, totally, yeah. I think that we have a bot that is saying that if you're using any animation, it's going to complain and you cannot merge PRs. If you're trying to animate the width and height, for example, it's going to scream that, hey, you cannot use native driver, and so prepare your code with native driver in mind. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So do you have any other talks or anything planned for in the future?
Not really. I think we had some Romanian guys from JS Heroes at TabJS conference, and they said that I can apply for the next edition because the current one, which starts in a couple of days, is already full. But for the next edition, maybe I will apply as a speaker, and they love to have me there. So I'll do my best to just represent Romania. Kudos for them.
Yeah, you did a great
but other
job
than
at
that,
FJS
not really.
So they should bring you.
Yeah, if I have to revisit my talk, definitely I'll rewrite it from scratch because I have some funny slides, let's say, and to interact more with the audience, because I think that this is what matters the most. Definitely to transmit to share the knowledge clearly, but also to interact with the people from the audience and maybe later on the one that are listening or watching you on YouTube. So yeah, it's getting the on the same track and transmitting the right vibe, let's say. Yeah, still it was my first talk, so I was doing my best.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. You did a really good job for it to be your first talk, especially. So if someone's listening and they want to learn about some of the stuff that you're talking about, maybe even some of the stuff that you've worked on, what should they do and where should they go to learn all of this stuff?
Yeah, so first, I really recommend Jason Brown, which is I think the one that wrote the animated handbook, which is online. When I first get started with animating in React Native, definitely I had the link open in my browser to always check, hey, what's interpolating? How can I use interpolating? And what clamp means, for example. He's a really nice guy and really recommend him, Jason Brown. And then lately, I think William Cadillon is like building great stuff around animations, and he has some YouTube videos, tutorials around it. Also me, for example, everything that I've created is free and open source. So if you can check out my GitHub, is Catalin Miron, or even Twitter, where I'm posting the latest animations, for example. And lately, I'm also building YouTube video tutorials, where I'm taking, for example, UI interactions, try to recreate those in React Native, and I'm also recording myself while I'm coding the UI challenge. So definitely recommend you to check those two guys plus me. I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but definitely I want to say thanks. This is not for outsiders that wanted to jump to React Native animation, but I really want to say thanks to Christophe and Vujot for what they were doing what they've done in React Native world in general, and also for Brent to being the first person to go to whenever you're trying to build something in React Native, definitely is going to be a small package written by him. So kudos to those three guys as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those people have done a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of very valuable stuff. Software Mansion is where Christophe works, and they're also the company that put on App.js Conf. And they have made a lot of contributions to the ecosystem lately. So definitely a lot of cool stuff going on there. So where can people follow you and hear about some of the stuff that you're working on social media and stuff?
Yeah, so usually my main channel of communication is Twitter. My Twitter handler is Miron Catalin with MironCatalin, and Catalin Miron on GitHub, if you'd like to check my projects. And my YouTube channel is Catalin Miron Dev. Lately, I got the chance to get a special URL because I reached more than 100 followers or subscribers. So there is no more a hash. And so I could get a friendly URL.
A real URL.
So those are three. Yeah, real URL.
Cool. So before we wrap up the episode, is there anything you wanted to touch base on that we haven't really covered?
Yeah, there are two things. So whenever you're trying to animate something in React Native, usually I had this feeling that people around you will say that it's impossible. And from my perspective, when I'm looking at impossible designs or the impossible UI animations, for me, it's a challenge. So always take it as a challenge. And you can do whatever you'd like in React Native, and definitely you can do it in React Native. That's for sure. And lately, I don't know if you'd like to support me, for example, I also created the Buy Me a Coffee link. So it's buymeacoffee.com/Catalin Miron if you'd like to support everything that I'm doing. And by the way, everything is open source and you can check it out. So I'm working for you guys and I'm doing my best to help you and to share my knowledge clearly as possible. And I hope that I will see more animations in React Native, especially in real world applications.
Awesome.
This episode is brought to you by TripleByte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume, you spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, TripleByte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. TripleByte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/reactradio. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through TripleByte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
So now I think we can go ahead and get to the picks. I guess I have a couple of picks. The first one is something I've mentioned already, is App.js Conf. It was a React Native and Expo conference that we had in Krakow, Poland last week, put on by Expo and Software Mansion. If you get a chance to go next year, definitely go. It was a really great experience. It was really well organized. It was a lot of fun, a lot of good content, a lot of good talks, and a lot of good networking. And the second thing I'd like to plug is a couple of the tutorials that I've done lately around GraphQL subscriptions. So if you look at my GitHub, you'll see Hype Beats, which is a real-time beatbox that I did using GraphQL subscriptions and AWS AppSync with Ken Wheeler's drum machine. And then I have Write With Me, which is a real-time markdown editor. And I have a few others there. So if you're interested in learning about GraphQL subscriptions and doing some interesting stuff, just check out my GitHub and look for those two projects. Catalin, do you have any picks today?
I think that you should go and check out Skidding's GitHub account. Skidding have built React Cosmos, which is a playground for React components. And he really deserves more attention because it's an awesome project. So you can go to github.com/React Cosmos and check out the project. Definitely, you'll love it. And I also like to say that definitely worth checking out App.js conference as well. Really nice conference. And especially the next edition, I think is going to be even awesome. So see you there. I think that I'll also be. So let's high five next year.
Yeah, I'll be there too, hopefully, if they invite me back, if they'll let me back. All right, cool. So that wraps up this episode. Catalin, thanks for coming on. That was really interesting and insightful. And I think we covered quite a bit in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. Last week, it was my first talk in front of a huge audience. And now it's my first time in being part of a podcast. So thank you so much, Nader, for giving me this chance. And I also remember the speakers dinner. You're in front of me. And yeah, I had a huge respect for you because you're a self-disciplined developer, which is not super easy to find. And really love everything you do. So keep up the good work. And yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for that very cool info. And I'm really lucky to be able to do what I do. And I think that you've had 2 firsts over the last couple of weeks. I hope you'll have a lot of other good firsts that come in this year for you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for your time. And thanks for everyone that listened today. We will have this new episode out hopefully within about a week. So this is right now the week after App.js Conf. So the following week, this should be released. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.